When a journalist mocked Barron Trump at a charity gala, no one expected his calm response to steal the show. The ballroom at the Fairmont Grand Hotel was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above rows of elegantly dressed attendees, their quiet hum of conversation adding to the grandeur of the annual charity gala. Among the crowd were some of the nation's most influential figures, business moguls, actors, and journalists, all gathered to support a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged youth. The air was alive with energy, yet an undercurrent of anticipation buzzed as the evening's keynote speaker prepared to take the stage. Seated toward the back, in a less conspicuous corner, was Barron Trump. At just 18 years old, his tall frame and stoic demeanor made him stand out, though not intentionally. He had been invited by a family friend, a quiet gesture meant to introduce him to a different circle. Unlike many attendees who thrived in the spotlight, Barron seemed content to observe, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room with a calmness that belied his age. The gala had been moving along smoothly. A string quartet played softly in the background as waitstaff glided through the room, serving delicate hors d'oeuvres and champagne. Conversations were warm, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Yet, as the night progressed, it became clear that the highlight everyone was waiting for was the speech. The journalist, a celebrated figure in liberal media circles, had been announced weeks earlier as the evening's keynote speaker. Known for sharp wit and unapologetic opinions, they were revered by some and criticized by others for their fiery rhetoric. Tonight, they promised to deliver an address that would challenge perspectives and ignite thought. But as the MC introduced the journalist, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Conversations quieted, glasses were set down, and all eyes turned to the stage. Barron, too, leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. The journalist stepped up to the podium, a confident smile spreading across their face. Dressed impeccably in a sleek black suit, they exuded charisma. The audience responded with polite applause, but there was an edge of expectation. Would they push boundaries tonight, as they so often did? What no one anticipated was how much. As the spotlight illuminated the stage and the journalist began to speak, the evening's elegance would soon give way to a tension no one in the room would forget. The journalist began with ease, their tone conversational and laced with charm. They joked about the city's infamous traffic and shared a light-hearted anecdote about a past gala mishap involving a toppled champagne tower. Laughter rippled through the audience, breaking some of the initial tension. For a moment, it felt like any other high-profile event, polished, predictable, and harmless. But soon their tone shifted. What started as general commentary on politics and culture veered toward a more pointed critique. They referenced well-known political figures, poking fun at their quirks and missteps. Each jab drew chuckles and nods from parts of the crowd, but others exchanged glances, their smiles tightening. Then the focus landed squarely on Donald Trump. Well, we can't talk about the state of the world without mentioning the man who made orange the new black. The journalist quipped, drawing scattered laughter. Love him or hate him, you have to admit he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me. The crowd's response was mixed. Some laughed openly, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Barron, sitting quietly at his table, remained still, his expression unreadable. If the journalists noticed his presence, they didn't let on, at least not yet. The jokes kept coming, each one sharper than the last. The journalist moved on to Trump's policies, his tweets, even his public appearances. The laughter began to thin out, replaced by a growing sense of unease among the attendees. But the journalist wasn't finished. And of course, they said, pausing for effect, we can't forget his most overlooked legacy, the next generation. I mean, let's talk about Barron. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Heads turned toward Barron, who sat motionless, his face now the center of attention. The journalist's tone remained playful, but the words carried a sting. Imagine growing up in a golden tower, surrounded by marble everything, and your dad tweeting about Kofefi while the rest of us are just trying to survive Monday mornings. That must have been character building. The attempt to humor fell flat. Some in the crowd chuckled nervously, but most sat in stunned silence. The spotlight of the moment, unasked for and unwelcome, had landed squarely on Barron. But instead of crumbling under the weight of the moment, Barron remained calm, his composure unshaken. What he would do next, however, would leave the entire room reeling. The room seemed to hold its breath. All eyes were on Barron Trump, a young man thrust into the spotlight without warning. The journalist's words lingered in the air, heavy and cutting, as the crowd waited for his reaction. But Barron didn't flinch. He didn't shift in his chair or glance around nervously. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his expression calm but unreadable, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. The silence grew louder with each passing second. A few people exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable. Even the journalist seemed to notice the tension, their confident smirk faltering ever so slightly as they glanced toward Barron's table. Perhaps they had expected a laugh or even a dismissive shrug. Anything but this quiet defiance. Barron's stillness wasn't born of indifference. It was something else entirely. His presence, understated yet commanding, seemed to grow as the moment stretched on. The room, which moments earlier had been buzzing with conversation and laughter, was now unnervingly quiet. It was as if everyone, even those who had chuckled at the jokes, suddenly realized the weight of what had been said. His silence wasn't just a lack of words. It was a statement in itself. It said, "I hear you, I see you, and I'm not moved." A murmur broke the silence as someone near the stage whispered to their companion. The journalist cleared their throat, attempting to regain control of the moment. "Tough crowd," they muttered into the microphone, forcing a laugh that no one echoed. The tension was thick, wrapping around the room like an invisible fog. And then Barron moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed back his chair and stood. The soft scrape of the chair legs against the floor was the only sound in the room. At just over 6 feet tall, he was an imposing figure, his height matched by an aura of unexpected maturity. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on the journalist. Barron didn't need to speak, yet his presence alone commanded attention, silencing even the faint whispers at the back of the room. He stepped away from his table and walked toward the stage, each step measured, his posture straight and unwavering. The journalist froze, their earlier confidence evaporating as Barron approached. The crowd watched, their eyes wide with a mix of anticipation and disbelief. No one knew what he would say or do, but one thing was certain. This young man was about to own the moment. But when Barron reached the edge of the stage and finally spoke, his words were nothing anyone could have anticipated. As Barron reached the edge of the stage, the crowd's collective gaze followed him. The tension in the air was almost tangible, every second feeling like an eternity. He stopped a few feet away from the podium, standing tall and composed. With a voice steady and deliberate, he spoke, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "Thank you for your insight," he began, his tone calm but firm. His choice of words caught the journalist and the audience off guard. There was no anger, no trace of indignation, only an eerie sense of control that seemed far beyond his years. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life," Barron continued, his eyes fixed on the journalist. "It's almost become a game to some, a way to fill in the gaps when you don't know the full story. And I get it, we're public figures. It comes with the territory." The room was silent, captivated by the clarity and maturity in his voice. Even those who had quietly laughed at the earlier jokes now sat motionless, their expressions tinged with unease. "But there's something important that often gets overlooked," Barron said, his tone shifting slightly, a subtle intensity building. "Behind every headline, behind every punchline, there's a human being, someone with their own struggles, their own dreams, and their own story. You may think you know me because of who my father is, but you don't. Not really." The journalist, who had been gripping the edge of the podium, now seemed visibly uncomfortable. Barron's words weren't an attack. They were a mirror, reflecting back the weight of what had just occurred. "What I've learned," Barron said, pausing for a moment, "is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's story." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, but Barron wasn't finished. He turned slightly, addressing the audience now as much as the journalist. "We live in a time where it's easy to tear each other down," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. "Words have power. They can hurt or they can heal. They can divide or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." The audience was spellbound. Barron's words, spoken with a calm resolve, carried a weight that seemed to transcend his age. It was clear that he wasn't just responding to a moment. He was speaking to something much larger, something universal. Barron took a step back, his gaze once again locking with the journalists. "I hope this gives you something to think about," he said softly. There was no malice in his voice, only a quiet strength that left the room in awe. He turned and began walking back to his seat, the soft clicks of his shoes on the polished floor the only sound in the stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the journalists stood frozen, their earlier bravado completely dissolved. But as Barron sat down and the applause began to build, the real impact of his words would echo far beyond that room. The applause started as a hesitant clap from somewhere near the front, but it grew quickly, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Within moments, the entire ballroom was on its feet, erupting into a thunderous standing ovation. Some clapped with admiration, others with a sense of redemption for the awkwardness that had hung in the air just minutes earlier. The journalist, still standing at the podium, attempted to muster a smile, but it was clear the moment no longer belonged to them. Barron, seated back at his table, didn't react to the applause. He remained composed, offering only a polite nod to the attendees around him. It wasn't humility or shyness. It was the quiet assurance of someone who had said exactly what needed to be said. Within hours, snippets of the moment began flooding social media. Attendees had discreetly recorded Barron's speech on their phones, and the footage was now spreading like wildfire. Tweets, Instagram stories, and TikTok clips captured the essence of the evening, with captions ranging from admiration for Barron's composure to critiques of the journalist's misplaced humor. "Barron Trump just schooled an entire room on class and respect," read one viral tweet. Another post, shared by a prominent celebrity in attendance, stated, "No matter what you think of his family, this young man just gave us all something to think about." News outlets picked up the story the next morning. Some praised Barron for his maturity, calling it a defining moment for someone who had spent much of his life in the shadow of public scrutiny. Others debated the ethics of the journalist's remarks, questioning whether public figures, especially young ones, should ever be fair game for such commentary. The journalists, for their part, issued a statement the following day. "Comedy and commentary are powerful tools, but they must be wielded responsibly. Last night, I crossed a line, and I apologized to Barron Trump for my remarks. But not everyone accepted the apology at face value. Talk shows, podcasts, and online forums buzzed with heated debates about the incident. Some argued that Barron's speech was a much-needed call for civility in an increasingly polarized world. Others saw it as a poignant reminder that even those in the public eye are human beings deserving of respect. For Barron, however, the frenzy of attention seemed irrelevant. He returned to his daily life with the same quiet dignity that had defined his response at the gala. Those who knew him said he barely acknowledged the uproar, choosing instead to focus on his studies and personal interests. But while Barron moved on, the lessons from that night lingered, sparking conversations that reached far beyond the ballroom. As the dust settled from the night of the gala, its ripple effects continued to echo. News outlets eventually moved on to other stories, but the moment lived on in discussions at dinner tables, classrooms, and offices. People dissected the evening not just for its drama, but for the powerful lessons it left behind. Barron's calm and thoughtful response had struck a chord. In an age dominated by outrage and instant reactions, His choice to approach the situation with poise and perspective was a refreshing anomaly. Many drew parallels to their own lives, asking themselves, how often do we pause before reacting? How often do we choose words that build instead of words that destroy? For some, the incident was a wake-up call. It highlighted how easy it is to dehumanize others in the name of humor, politics, or entertainment. The journalist's comments were a stark reminder of the power words hold, not just to entertain, but to wound. Parents used the moment as a teaching opportunity for their children. Videos of Barron's speech became a tool in classrooms to discuss respect, empathy, and the importance of standing up for oneself without tearing others down. Teachers praised his ability to address conflict with grace, encouraging students to think critically about how they communicate. Yet the most profound impact of the night was its ability to bridge divides, if only for a moment. People from different political beliefs and walks of life found themselves united in admiration for Barron's maturity. It wasn't about his last name or his father's legacy. It was about a young man demonstrating that respect and empathy still have a place in the world, even in the face of provocation. By choosing to respond with kindness and integrity, Barron had reminded everyone in that room, and countless others watching from afar, that dignity is a choice. His actions showed that no matter how heated or polarized a situation may become, there is always power in choosing to rise above. As the conversations continued, one sentiment seemed to resonate most. Words can wound, but they can also heal. It's up to each of us to decide how we use them. In the end, Barron's actions didn't just defend his own dignity. They inspired a moment of collective reflection, a reminder that respect, even when undeserved, can be a transformative force. Let Barron's example be a reminder for us all. Words have power. Use them wisely. Whether it's with a friend, a stranger, or even someone you disagree with, choose respect and empathy. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that challenge and inspire us to be better. Let's keep the conversation going.